The dusty road shimmered under the Texas sun, stretching like a pale ribbon through endless fields of cotton. A battered olive-green Jeep rattled along it, kicking up a plume of fine red dust that settled on everything. Inside, Sergeant Eleanor Vance gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white. She was a woman of sturdy build, with keen, observant eyes that missed little. Her uniform, though a little faded, was impeccably pressed, a testament to her inherent discipline. At 28, Eleanor had already seen more than her fair share of hardship. But nothing quite prepared her for the dismissive glances and outright snickers that had followed her since her arrival at Camp Hearn a week ago. Camp Hearn, a sprawling prisoner-of-war camp nestled in the heart of Texas, was a world unto itself. Barbed wire fences glinted in the harsh sun. Watchtowers loomed, and the constant hum of activity created a peculiar energy. It was 1943, and America was deeply entrenched in World War II. While the front lines raged across oceans, a different kind of war was being fought on the home front. A battle for resources, for morale, and for the efficient management of thousands of enemy combatants now housed on American soil. Eleanor, a seasoned quartermaster from a small, tight-knit community in rural Missouri, had been transferred to Camp Hearn with a promotion and a mandate: improve the supply chain and logistics for the German POWs. It sounded simple enough on paper, but the reality was far more complex. The camp was predominantly run by men, many of whom held deeply ingrained prejudices about women in uniform, especially in roles of authority. Her first encounter with Captain Miller, the camp's executive officer, had been a chilly one. He was a tall, stern man with a perpetually furrowed brow and a disdain for anything that disrupted his established routines. "Sergeant Vance," he'd grunted, barely looking up from his desk, "I understand you're here to streamline things. Don't cause trouble. Just do your job and stay out of the way." The words stung, but Eleanor had learned long ago to let such slights roll off her back. She knew her worth, and she knew the importance of her mission. Her younger brother, Billy, was somewhere in the European theater, fighting on the very front lines against the men now held within these fences. The thought of him fueled her resolve. Every efficient delivery, every well-stocked pantry meant resources freed up for the war effort, for men like Billy. Her daily routine quickly became a monotonous ballet of logistics. She oversaw the unloading of supplies from trains, the inventorying of food and clothing, and the distribution to the various mess halls and barracks. The sheer volume of provisions was staggering. Tons of meat, flour, sugar, and fresh produce flowed into the camp daily. It was more than she'd ever seen in her small hometown, more than many American families had access to in those lean times of rationing. The other soldiers, mostly older men nearing retirement, or those deemed unfit for combat, watched her with a mixture of amusement and suspicion. "Look at Little Miss Quartermaster trying to tell us how to do our jobs," she'd overheard Private Jenkins, a lanky, grizzled veteran, sneer to a comrade. "What does she know about feeding 1,000 krauts?" Eleanor ignored them, focusing instead on the ledgers, the inventory sheets, and the endless crates. She observed everything. She noticed the way the German prisoners, mostly young men, some barely out of their teens, carried themselves. They were clean, well-fed, and surprisingly organized. They played soccer in the dusty yards, tended small gardens, and even had a camp newspaper. It was a stark contrast to the images of starving, brutalized enemies portrayed in newsreels back home. One afternoon, while inspecting a delivery of fresh beef, she saw something that truly bothered her. A truck overflowing with prime cuts was being unloaded. 2 German POWs, supervised by a bored-looking corporal, were carefully stacking the meat in a refrigerated locker. Their movements were methodical, almost casual. As Eleanor approached, she heard one of the Germans chuckle. "More delicious American steak, Hans," he said in heavily accented English. "This is better than what we ate at home before the war." The corporal, seemingly oblivious, just nodded. But Eleanor's blood ran cold. Better than what they ate at home. Her own family, like many across the country, was tightening its belt, making do with less and stretching rations. The disconnect was jarring. That evening, as the Texas sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery hues, Eleanor sat alone in her Spartan barrack room, poring over her supply records. She cross-referenced lists, checked invoices, and double-checked her calculations. The numbers didn't lie. The rations allocated to the POWs were generous, far more so than those given to American civilians, and in some cases, even more than what was provided to American soldiers overseas. She thought of Billy, shivering in a foxhole somewhere, likely eating tasteless K rations, while here, behind barbed wire, his enemies were feasting on fresh meat and vegetables. A knot of anger tightened in her stomach. It wasn't about vengeance. It was about fairness, about the sacrifices being made by ordinary Americans, and about the unspoken contract between a nation and its fighting men. The next morning, Eleanor decided to confront Captain Miller. She marched into his office, her report in hand, a flicker of determined fire in her eyes. "Captain," she began, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands, "I've been reviewing the supply logs, and I believe there's an anomaly." Miller looked up, his expression already one of irritation. "An anomaly, Sergeant? What are you talking about now?" "Sir," she continued, laying out her meticulously prepared charts and figures, "the calorie intake for the German POWs is significantly higher than regulations suggest. In fact, based on my calculations, they are consistently receiving rations that allow them to gain weight, not just maintain it." Miller leaned back in his chair, a slow, dismissive smile spreading across his face. "And your point, Sergeant Vance? We're not starving them. They're prisoners of war, not some charity case. My point, Captain," Eleanor replied, her voice rising slightly, "is that while American families are tightening their belts, while our own soldiers are making do with less, these men are being fed like kings. I've observed their physical condition. They are healthy, robust, and many are clearly putting on weight." Miller let out a short, humorless laugh. "So what do you suggest, Sergeant? We put them on a diet? Start rationing their schnitzel? We have international laws to adhere to, the Geneva Convention. We treat them humanely, and we prevent disease. A well-fed prisoner is a compliant prisoner." He waved a hand dismissively. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have actual work to do. Stick to your quartermaster duties, Sergeant. Leave the bigger picture to those of us who understand it." The dismissal was brutal, designed to deflate her, to put her back in her place. Eleanor felt the familiar burn of frustration, but she refused to let it show. She saluted crisply, turned on her heel, and walked out of his office, her resolve hardened. This wasn't just about numbers anymore. This was about a fundamental injustice, and Eleanor Vance was not one to back down from a fight, especially when she believed she was right. She would find a way to expose the truth, no matter how many walls she had to break down. The idea of German POWs packing on 50 pounds while her countrymen sacrificed was a bitter pill she refused to swallow. Captain Miller's dismissal only fueled Eleanor's determination. The sting of his words, the condescending tone, and the outright rejection of her concerns solidified her conviction. This wasn't just a miscalculation. It felt like a deliberate oversight, or worse, a willful turning of a blind eye. The sheer volume of food, the vibrant health of the German POWs, and the stark contrast with the rationing endured by her fellow Americans became an obsession. She knew she couldn't rely on official channels, at least not yet. Miller had made that abundantly clear. Her next move had to be subtle, systematic, and undeniable. She needed evidence, not just numbers on a page, but observations that spoke volumes. Eleanor began her own quiet investigation. Her quartermaster duties gave her unparalleled access to the camp's inner workings. She spent more time in the mess halls, observing meal service, as she'd tell any curious corporal. She watched the POWs eat, noting the generous portions, the variety of food. She saw them scrape untouched portions of bread and even meat into designated pig slop barrels, a luxury many American families could only dream of. She started taking mental notes, then discreetly started a small personal journal, not official records, but her own observations. October 12th. Mess Hall 3. Dinner, roast beef, potatoes, gravy, green beans, apple pie. Many plates left half-eaten. POW Schmidt complaining about a lack of seasoning. October 15th. Saw POW Becker exercising in yard. Much larger than when he arrived, according to his intake photo. Looks like he's gained considerable weight. Eleanor also began talking unofficially to the other enlisted men. Not directly about her suspicions, but about general camp conditions, the challenges of managing so many prisoners, and the sheer volume of supplies. She tried to gauge their opinions, to see if anyone else shared her unease. Many of them, like Private Jenkins, were too jaded or too comfortable in their routines to care much. "They're just krauts, Sergeant," Jenkins had grumbled one afternoon watching a group of POWs play volleyball. "As long as they don't cause trouble, who cares what they eat? Less paperwork for us." But a few, particularly the younger guards, seemed more receptive. Private Thompson, a fresh-faced recruit from rural Arkansas, often helped Eleanor unload supply trucks. He was quiet but observant. One day, as they were carrying sacks of flour, Thompson ventured, "Sergeant, you ever notice how healthy these Germans look? My pa, he's a farmer, and he's been telling me about the rationing back home. Says folks are getting thin." Eleanor seized the opening. "I have, Private. It's something I've been looking into." She didn't reveal her full hand, but a seed of doubt had been planted in Thompson's mind. Her biggest hurdle, however, wasn't just the indifference or the sexism. It was the sheer force of bureaucracy and established protocol. The camp operated under strict guidelines, and challenging them meant challenging the very system. And the system, as Miller had demonstrated, was resistant to change, especially when that change was suggested by a woman. The general attitude among the male officers was that Eleanor was an overzealous female, perhaps even a hysterical woman trying to make a name for herself by finding fault where there was none. She heard the whispers, the veiled insults. "She's just trying to cause trouble. Women shouldn't be in charge of logistics. She probably just misses her kitchen." One evening, after a particularly frustrating day of being stonewalled by various departments, Eleanor found herself in the camp library, a small, dusty room mostly used by the POWs for their studies. She was looking for official regulations regarding POW treatment, hoping to find some clause, some paragraph that supported her argument. She stumbled upon an old copy of the Geneva Convention, translated into English. As she read through the articles, her eyes widened. Article 26 stated, "The food rations of prisoners of war shall be equivalent in quantity and quality to those of depot troops at the base." Depot troops. Not combat troops, not civilians, but soldiers stationed at a base. The phrasing was vague enough to allow for interpretation, but Eleanor realized the problem wasn't just about the amount of food, but the quality and variety. The POWs were receiving rations that were arguably better than most American depot troops, who were themselves subject to wartime austerity. It was then she understood the subtle genius of the system that allowed this to happen. No one was technically breaking the rules. They were simply interpreting them in the most generous way possible for the POWs, while simultaneously adhering to other directives that prioritized POW morale and humane treatment to prevent uprisings or negative international press. The true cost, however, was borne by the American public and, indirectly, by American soldiers overseas. Eleanor felt a surge of cold fury. This wasn't just about food. It was about the very perception of justice and sacrifice. It was about her brother, Billy, and every other soldier fighting and sacrificing, while their enemies enjoyed a comfortable captivity. She decided to broaden her scope. She began observing the camp's accounting office, pretending to verify supply deliveries. She saw the stacks of invoices, the meticulous records of expenditure. The sheer cost of feeding these men was astronomical. But when she tried to ask about specific allocations, she was met with blank stares or polite deflections. "That's above your pay grade, Sergeant," a bored clerk would say. Her efforts to get official documentation were consistently rebuffed. Captain Miller had effectively put a wall around her, ensuring she couldn't dig too deep. He even started assigning her to more mundane tasks, like inspecting laundry facilities or reorganizing storage sheds, clearly hoping to distract her or make her give up. But Eleanor was not easily deterred. The more they tried to block her, the more convinced she became that there was something to hide. Her mind raced, piecing together fragments of information, casual remarks, and her own observations. The sheer amount of food, the almost indulgent attitude towards the POW's comfort, the dismissive attitude of the officers, it all pointed to a deliberate policy, albeit an unacknowledged one. One evening, as she was leaving the supply depot, she saw Captain Miller driving out of the camp in his personal car. He was heading not towards town, but down a small, unpaved road that led to a secluded area beyond the main camp gates, an area she knew was off-limits. Her instincts, honed by years of managing supplies and noticing discrepancies, screamed at her. Why was the captain going to an unauthorized area after hours? A spark of an idea ignited in her mind. It was risky, perhaps even insubordinate, but Eleanor knew she couldn't simply walk away. She was a soldier, and she had a duty to her country, a duty that now felt more pressing than ever. She waited until his car was out of sight, then, feigning a need to check a late delivery, she borrowed a Jeep. Her heart pounded in her chest. She was stepping far outside her comfort zone, far beyond the lines of her quartermaster duties. But the image of her brother, thin and weary, flashed in her mind. She had to know the truth. The walls around her were high, but Eleanor Vance was determined to find a way over or through them. Eleanor followed the dusty trail Captain Miller had taken, her heart thumping a steady rhythm against her ribs. The Jeep's headlights cut through the deepening twilight, illuminating a path less traveled, eventually leading to a cluster of old, abandoned farm buildings. The main camp's lights twinkled in the distance, a deceptive sense of security against the quiet mystery unfolding before her. She parked the Jeep a little distance away and approached on foot, moving with the practiced stealth of a hunter. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and something else, something sweet and green. As she drew closer, she realized what it was. A garden, not a small makeshift plot, but a sprawling, meticulously maintained garden, brimming with vegetables and herbs, and tending to it, under the soft glow of makeshift lanterns, were several German POWs, supervised by a grizzled, unsmiling civilian man she didn't recognize. Captain Miller was there too, his back to her, deep in conversation with the civilian. They seemed to be discussing crop yields, the best way to handle blight, and the upcoming harvest. Eleanor watched, hidden behind a crumbling stone wall, her mind reeling. This wasn't just a garden. It was a commercial operation. The scale was too large, the produce too abundant for mere personal consumption, and the presence of Captain Miller, out here after hours, with German prisoners working under a civilian contractor, screamed impropriety. She listened intently, straining to catch snippets of conversation. "Good yield on the tomatoes this season, Mr. Henderson," Miller was saying. "The boys have been working hard. Should fetch a good price at market." "Mr. Henderson," the civilian grunted in agreement. "Finest produce around, Captain. Those boys know their soil. Puts my hired hands to shame." Eleanor felt a cold dread settle in her stomach. "Market. Price. Finest produce." It clicked into place with a sickening thud. The excess food in the mess halls, the healthy glow of the prisoners, the resistance to her inquiries. It wasn't just about humane treatment. It was about profit. The German POWs were being used as unpaid labor to cultivate a secret farm, and the produce was being sold on the black market or to local businesses, enriching someone's pockets, likely Captain Miller's and Mr. Henderson's. The very resources meant to sustain the war effort. The labor of enemy combatants were being siphoned off for personal gain. It was a betrayal of the highest order, a slap in the face to every American sacrificing for the war. She knew she needed irrefutable proof. Sneaking back to her Jeep, Eleanor retrieved a small, unassuming camera she'd borrowed from the camp's photography club, pretending she wanted to document the local wildlife. It was an old model, not ideal for low light, but she had to try. She carefully framed a few shots. The garden, the POWs working, Captain Miller and Henderson talking, the abundant crops. The flash, however, was a risk. She took a deep breath, hoping the distant sounds of the camp and the rustling leaves would mask it. A faint click, a brief flicker of light. She prayed it would be enough. Over the next few days, Eleanor meticulously developed the film herself, using the camp's darkroom under the pretense of personal projects. The photos were grainy but undeniably clear enough. The garden, the men, Captain Miller's distinctive profile. She also continued to gather her written observations, noting dates, times, and the specific names of POWs she recognized working at the secret farm. She knew she couldn't confront Miller directly. He would deny everything, destroy the evidence, and likely have her transferred or worse, court-martialed on some trumped-up charge. She needed allies, people who would believe her and who had enough authority to act. Her thoughts turned to Private Thompson, the young soldier who had shown a flicker of understanding. He was too junior to be a direct ally, but he might know others, or at least be a witness. She also remembered Mrs. Gable, the kindly, elderly civilian clerk who worked in the camp's administrative office. Mrs. Gable was a quiet woman, often overlooked. But Eleanor had noticed her keen eye for detail and her disapproving frown whenever she overheard the men making disparaging remarks about the POW's generous rations. Eleanor approached Mrs. Gable first, carefully. She started by asking seemingly innocuous questions about the camp's agricultural programs, knowing full well there were none officially. Mrs. Gable, ever diligent, confirmed her suspicions. "No, Sergeant Vance, we don't have any official farms. Just that small victory garden by the officers' mess. Why do you ask?" Eleanor hesitated, then decided to take a leap of faith. She closed the office door and, in a hushed voice, explained what she had discovered, showing Mrs. Gable the grainy photographs. Mrs. Gable's eyes widened, her usually placid face hardening with disbelief and then righteous anger. "The nerve," Mrs. Gable whispered, her voice trembling. "Selling goods on the side? And using our boys' labor for it? While our own families are struggling to put food on the table? This is an outrage!" Eleanor felt a surge of relief. She wasn't alone. "I need help, Mrs. Gable. I need someone with enough authority to listen, someone who can't be brushed aside by Captain Miller." Mrs. Gable thought for a moment, her brow furrowed. "There's Colonel Hayes," she said, naming the camp's commanding officer. "But he trusts Miller implicitly. Miller handles most of the day-to-day operations. It would take something big to get his attention." She paused. "However, there is another. Major Peterson. He's with the Inspector General's office, stationed at the regional command. He conducts surprise inspections, but he's known to be fair and thorough, and he has no love for officers who abuse their position. A glimmer of hope." "How do I contact him?" Eleanor asked. "You don't directly," Mrs. Gable replied. "But I have access to the camp's outgoing mail log. I can send a letter on your behalf anonymously, detailing your concerns and suggesting an immediate, unannounced inspection of Camp Hearn, particularly the area beyond the main gates." She gave Eleanor a shrewd look. "And you, Sergeant, will ensure that Major Peterson gets a complete picture of the situation when he arrives." Eleanor felt a knot of anxiety tighten in her stomach. An anonymous letter. It was risky, but it was their best shot. She spent the rest of the evening compiling a detailed report, citing the Geneva Convention articles, outlining her observations, listing the specific dates and times she had seen POWs at the secret farm, and attaching the photographs. She meticulously detailed the discrepancy between POW rations and civilian rations, using the official records she had secretly copied. The next morning, Mrs. Gable, with a nervous but determined expression, mailed the envelope. The waiting began. Every day felt like an eternity. Eleanor continued her duties, acting as if nothing was amiss, but her senses were heightened, her every nerve taut. She watched Miller, trying to discern if he suspected anything. He remained his usual gruff, dismissive self, occasionally assigning her to menial tasks, clearly convinced he had successfully sidelined her. Then, one Tuesday morning, as the sun climbed high over the Texas plains, a sleek black sedan, civilian-plated, pulled up to the camp's main gate. Out stepped a tall, imposing man in a crisp uniform, adorned with the insignia of a major. He carried a briefcase, and his expression was stern. Major Peterson. Eleanor, who happened to be directing a supply truck near the entrance, felt a jolt of adrenaline. He was here. Her anonymous letter had worked. As Captain Miller, looking visibly startled, rushed to greet the major, Eleanor caught Major Peterson's eye. For a fleeting moment, she thought she saw a faint, almost imperceptible nod in her direction. It was enough. She knew her fight was far from over, but the first critical battle had been won. The walls of indifference and corruption were about to be breached. The truth, like the fierce Texas sun, was about to shine down on Camp Hearn, exposing everything hidden in the shadows. The arrival of Major Peterson sent a ripple of unease through Camp Hearn. Captain Miller, usually unflappable in his rigid authority, was visibly flustered. His usual stern demeanor was replaced by an almost frantic attempt to appear welcoming and efficient. Eleanor watched him from a distance, a small, grim smile playing on her lips. The tables for a moment had turned. Major Peterson, a man who radiated quiet authority, wasted no time. He immediately requested a tour of the camp, starting with the mess halls and supply depots. Eleanor made sure she was always in the vicinity, appearing to be diligently carrying out her duties, but always ready to answer any questions the major might have, or to subtly guide his attention. As they walked through Mess Hall 2, where a group of German POWs were finishing their lunch, Major Peterson paused. He observed the generous portions, the remnants of baked chicken, mashed potatoes, and even a small cake for dessert. He picked up a plate that had been left half-eaten and looked at the uneaten food with a thoughtful expression. "Captain Miller," he said, his voice calm but piercing, "these rations seem substantial. Are these standard for all POW camps?" Miller, sweating slightly despite the cool breeze, stammered, "Yes, sir. We adhere strictly to the Geneva Convention, sir. Humane treatment is paramount. Keeps morale high, prevents incidents." Peterson simply nodded, his gaze sweeping over the robust, healthy-looking prisoners. Then he turned to Eleanor, who was meticulously organizing a stack of clean trays. "Sergeant Vance, as quartermaster, you would be intimately familiar with the camp's provisions. Do these rations align with the standards for American depot troops, as stipulated by the convention?" It was her moment. Eleanor met his gaze, her voice clear and steady. "Major, sir, based on my detailed analysis of supply logs and observed consumption, the calorie count and variety of provisions provided to the POWs significantly exceed what is generally allocated to American depot troops, and certainly what is available to American civilians under rationing. Many of the prisoners have demonstrably gained significant weight since their arrival." Miller scoffed. "Sergeant Vance has a tendency to exaggerate, Major. She's new to this kind of scale." Peterson held up a hand, silencing Miller. "I appreciate your input, Captain, but Sergeant Vance's observations are noted." He then turned his attention back to the mess hall, his eyes lingering on a particularly portly German prisoner who was enjoying his dessert with relish. The inspection continued throughout the day. Peterson asked pointed questions about inventory control, food waste, and the overall health of the prisoners. He even requested to see their medical records, which confirmed Eleanor's observation. Very few illnesses, and many instances of weight gain documented during their captivity, but the real test would come in the afternoon. Eleanor had specifically mentioned the area beyond the main gates in her anonymous letter. She had to ensure Peterson found the secret farm. After reviewing the official camp records, Major Peterson stated, "Captain Miller, I'd like to see the outer perimeter of the camp, particularly any areas where agricultural activities might be taking place, beyond the main fence lines." Miller's face visibly paled. "Sir, there's nothing of note out there. Just some old abandoned farmland. Rough terrain, sir, not really suitable for inspection. Nevertheless, Captain," Peterson's voice was firm, "I insist. Sergeant Vance, you mentioned observing certain discrepancies in that direction during your duties. Would you be able to guide us?" Eleanor's heart leaped. This was it. "Yes, sir, Major," she replied, her voice brimming with a quiet triumph. "I can certainly lead the way." As Eleanor drove the Jeep, with Major Peterson in the passenger seat and a fuming Captain Miller relegated to the back, she steered them down the same dusty road she had taken days earlier. The tension in the vehicle was palpable. Miller muttered under his breath, clearly furious but unable to object. When they reached the hidden farm, the sight was even more damning in the daylight. The vast garden, overflowing with ripe vegetables, was undeniable. Several German POWs were out in the fields, under the supervision of Mr. Henderson, harvesting tomatoes and picking beans. They looked up, startled, as the military jeep approached. Major Peterson stepped out, his gaze sweeping over the scene. His expression was unreadable, but Eleanor could feel the weight of his judgment. He walked over to a row of corn, pulling back a husk to reveal a perfectly ripe ear. "And what exactly is this, Captain Miller?" he asked, his voice now devoid of any warmth. Miller, caught completely off guard, struggled for an explanation. "Sir, it's a small victory garden, sir, for the camp staff. A private initiative to boost morale and provide fresh produce. A small victory garden that spans several acres and employs a dozen German prisoners during official duty hours?" Peterson's voice was dangerously quiet. He turned to Mr. Henderson, who stood frozen, his eyes wide with panic. "And who are you, sir? And under what authority are you supervising prisoners of war?" Henderson stammered, I'm just a local farmer, Major. Captain Miller hired me to oversee this project. A project that generates profits, I presume." Peterson pressed. "Profits that are not going into official camp funds, are they?" He then turned to Eleanor. "Sergeant Vance, do you have any documentation or observations regarding this private initiative?" Eleanor, her spine straight, presented her meticulously kept journal and the grainy photographs. "Yes, sir. My records indicate that Captain Miller has been overseeing this operation, utilizing POW labor for several months. The produce is, to my understanding, being sold commercially. I also have detailed observations of the extensive food provisions within the camp that exceed necessary humane standards, suggesting that a significant surplus is being diverted, either through this operation or other channels, for personal gain." Peterson took the journal, flipping through the pages, his gaze growing sterner with each entry. He looked at the photographs, the images of Miller and Henderson clearly visible. The evidence was irrefutable. He turned back to Miller, his eyes cold and unwavering. "Captain Miller, the Geneva Convention explicitly forbids the use of POW labor for private gain. This is a clear and egregious violation of military regulations, international law, and a profound betrayal of public trust during wartime. While American families ration and American soldiers fight and starve, you have been enriching yourself using enemy labor and taxpayer-funded resources." Miller slumped, defeated. His carefully constructed facade crumbled, revealing a man consumed by greed and cowardice. He tried to speak, but no coherent words came out. Peterson then looked at the German POWs, who had stopped working and were watching the scene with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. "You men," he said, addressing them in German, "from this moment on you are relieved of duty in this private enterprise. You will return to your barracks." As the POWs shuffled away, Peterson turned back to his team. "Captain Miller, you are hereby relieved of your command, pending a full court-martial. Sergeant Vance, you are to immediately take charge of all camp logistics and supplies, effective immediately. Ensure that all provisions are strictly audited and brought in line with official regulations. This farm is to be dismantled, and all remaining produce will be donated to local charities or military hospitals. Mr. Henderson, you will be facing charges for collaborating in this scheme." Eleanor felt a wave of relief wash over her, followed by a fierce sense of satisfaction. Justice. It had taken persistence, courage, and going against the grain, but she had done it. The whispers, the insults, the dismissals, they had all been silenced by the undeniable truth. The man who had mocked her, who had tried to sideline her, was now stripped of his authority, exposed for his corruption. Major Peterson, his work not yet done, turned to Eleanor, a respectful glint in his eye. "Sergeant Vance, your diligence, integrity, and courage are exemplary. You saw an injustice, and you pursued the truth despite significant resistance. Your actions have saved countless resources and upheld the integrity of this nation's wartime efforts. You have done your country a great service." The words were a balm to her soul, a profound acknowledgment of her struggle. Eleanor, the quartermaster who had been underestimated and dismissed, had just exposed a significant wartime scandal. Her journey for justice was not yet complete, but a powerful, satisfying victory had been achieved. The truth had finally been brought to light, and with it, respect had finally been earned. The brave, emotionally strong female soldier had prevailed. The news of Captain Miller's arrest and the discovery of the secret farm sent shockwaves through Camp Hearn. The once rigid, almost complacent atmosphere of the camp was replaced by a flurry of activity and a palpable sense of tension. Soldiers who had previously mocked Eleanor now looked at her with a mixture of awe and apprehension. The whispers still followed her, but now they were whispers of respect, of grudging admiration, and of a dawning understanding of her unwavering resolve. Eleanor, now acting as the interim camp executive officer, faced an immediate and daunting task. She had to dismantle the corrupt system Miller had built and restore integrity to the camp's operations. Her first priority was a complete overhaul of the supply chain and rationing system. She worked tirelessly, poring over ledgers, personally supervising deliveries, and ensuring that the provisions for the German POWs were brought strictly in line with official Geneva Convention guidelines, equivalent to American depot troops. No more, no less. This meant a significant reduction in the quantity and variety of food for the prisoners. The German POWs, who had grown accustomed to their abundant meals, were initially disgruntled. There were complaints, grumblings, and even a minor protest in one of the mess halls. But Eleanor was unyielding. She personally addressed the prisoners, explaining in no uncertain terms that the new rations were fair and in accordance with international law. She also initiated new work programs for the POWs, focusing on essential camp maintenance and support, ensuring their labor truly benefited the war effort, not private pockets. Private Thompson, the young soldier who had hinted at his own doubts, became one of Eleanor's most reliable aides. He was eager to help, genuinely impressed by her courage. Mrs. Gable, too, continued to be a silent but staunch supporter, ensuring that Eleanor had access to all the administrative resources she needed. The investigation into Miller and Henderson quickly escalated. Major Peterson returned with a team of investigators from the Inspector General's office. They meticulously sifted through records, interviewed witnesses, and gathered overwhelming evidence of their illicit activities. It turned out the secret farm was just one facet of their scheme. They had also been diverting fuel, medical supplies, and even construction materials for sale on the black market. The scale of the corruption was far greater than Eleanor had initially imagined. News of the scandal, though initially hushed by military command, eventually began to leak to the local press. The story of the Texas Chow Hounds, as some newspapers sensationally dubbed the German POWs, and the brave female sergeant who exposed the corruption, captured the public's attention. While some segments of the public expressed outrage, others praised Eleanor's integrity and highlighted the sacrifices being made by ordinary Americans. For Eleanor, the days blurred into a relentless schedule of duties. She worked long hours, often sleeping only a few hours a night. The emotional toll was significant. She was constantly under scrutiny, constantly fighting against the lingering resistance from some of the old guard who still resented her authority. But with each successful audit, each streamlined process, and each tangible improvement in the camp's legitimate operations, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. One afternoon, a letter arrived for Eleanor from her mother. It was filled with news from home, but tucked inside was a clipping from their local newspaper. The headline read, "Missouri's own Sergeant Vance exposes wartime corruption." The article detailed her actions, painting her as a hero. Her mother had underlined a sentence in shaky handwriting. "Billy would be so proud, honey." The words brought tears to Eleanor's eyes. It wasn't about fame or accolades. It was about honoring the sacrifices of men like Billy, about upholding the values she believed in. The letter also contained a more personal note. Billy had been wounded but was recovering in a hospital in England. A surge of relief washed over her, mixing with the profound exhaustion she felt. A few weeks later, Captain Miller's court-martial began. It was a swift and decisive trial, given the overwhelming evidence. Eleanor was called to testify, her account clear, concise, and damning. Miller was found guilty on multiple counts of fraud, embezzlement, and dereliction of duty. He was stripped of his rank, dishonorably discharged, and sentenced to a lengthy prison term. Mr. Henderson also faced severe penalties. The ending was satisfying, a tangible victory for justice. But the story didn't end there for Eleanor. Her actions had not gone unnoticed by the higher echelons of the military. One crisp autumn morning, a month after the court-martial, Major Peterson returned to Camp Hearn. He found Eleanor in her office, meticulously reviewing the new supply manifests. He observed her for a moment, noticing the quiet competence and the unwavering focus in her eyes. "Sergeant Vance," he said, stepping into the room. Eleanor looked up, surprised. "Major Peterson, sir. To what do I owe the pleasure?" He offered her a rare, genuine smile. "I've just come from Washington, Sergeant. The War Department has been very impressed with your work here, not just with exposing the corruption, but with your exemplary leadership in bringing this camp back to order." Eleanor felt a blush creep up her neck. "I was just doing my job, sir." "You did far more than that, Sergeant," Peterson replied. "You showed courage, integrity, and a strategic mind that many officers, far more senior than you, would envy." He then paused, his gaze thoughtful. "The War Department is establishing a new task force within the Inspector General's office. Its mandate will be to audit and oversee supply chains and logistics across all domestic military installations, particularly POW camps, to prevent future abuses. They need someone with practical experience, someone who isn't afraid to challenge the status quo, and someone who understands the true cost of inefficiency and corruption." He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a set of orders. "Sergeant Vance, effective immediately, you are promoted to lieutenant. You are to report to Washington, D.C. next month, where you will serve as a lead investigator on this new task force." Eleanor stared at the orders, her mind reeling. Lieutenant, Washington, D.C., a lead investigator. It was an incredible opportunity, a complete validation of her efforts and a testament to the respect she had earned. The little girl from rural Missouri, the quartermaster dismissed by her male peers, was now a commissioned officer, entrusted with a vital role in protecting the nation's resources. She looked up at Major Peterson, a fierce, determined light in her eyes. "Thank you, sir. I won't let you down." The journey to justice had been long and arduous, marked by injustice and the constant battle to prove her worth. But Eleanor Vance had not only found justice and exposed the truth, she had earned something far more profound, genuine respect, not just from others, but from herself. Her path, once a dusty road in rural Texas, now led to the very heart of the nation's capital, where she would continue to serve her country with unwavering strength and integrity, a true testament to the brave and emotionally resilient woman she had become. The woman who had been underestimated in the beginning had risen, proving her strength, sacrifice, and ultimately earning her rightful place in the service of her nation.